What's up, guys? You are watching Fight Feed, and today we're going to be diving into my picks and predictions for Dana White's Contender Series Season 9, Week 3, happening on August 26, 2025. Let's go ahead and dive into this card. The first fight of the night, we've got Darion Abbey versus Donte Johnson. Darion Abbey's 32 years old, 6'6", but his reach is not available on Tapology, but he fights at heavyweight. He is 7-4 in his professional career, 0-0 in the UFC. Donte Johnson, on the other hand, 26 years old, 6 feet tall. His reach is also not on Tapology, but he is 204.5 pounds because he started off his career doing a few heavyweight bouts, and then he went back down to light heavyweight, and now he's getting this opportunity, which is going to be a heavyweight bout on Dana White's Contender Series. He is 5-0, no record in the UFC. Taking a look at the styles for Darion Abbey and Donte Johnson. Darion Abbey seems to be a guy that is looking to keep things on the feet. 56% of his wins by KO. 28% of his wins by submission, so he does have a little bit of a submission game in his bag if he needs it. But now weaknesses for Darion Abbey, 75% of his L's are coming by way of KO, which I believe 3 KOs on his record, if I'm not mistaken. That to me says he is definitely susceptible to those KO shots should they land. And then on the other side with Donte Johnson, 100% finish rate. All of his wins in his professional career have come by way of first round knockout. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about this fight. Some weaknesses for Donte Johnson. He's undefeated as a pro, but he had been KO'd when he was an amateur. So just calling that out as something to keep in mind, because there's obviously, although that it was his amateur career happened a few years back, it definitely begs the question of, what is his chin looking like, especially if he gets cracked by a guy who's 6'6" and a natural heavyweight. But one other thing that I would call out in this fight as a weakness, perhaps, is the fact that Donte Johnson is fighting at heavyweight when in recent times he's fought at light heavyweight. Now, like I said in the slide before, Donte did start off his career in the heavyweight division. His first, I think, 3 bouts were heavyweight bouts where he also was able to get KOs. But you do need to think about the fact that those were against guys that are not 6'6". So just keep in mind that Darion Abbey is going to have a massive, height advantage, potentially just overall size advantage, assuming that 6'6" is actually his real height. Jumping into the momentum check for both of these gentlemen. So Darion Abbey, 3-fight win streak. He last fought March 28, 2025. His last 4, as you can see here, which, guys, this is a new adjustment I'm making on my, at least on my Dana White's Contender Series picks, instead of writing these out, just getting an image from Tapology so that way you guys can see what's going on. But the last 4 fights for Darion Abbey, like I said, he got 3 wins because he got a 3-fight win streak. Those came by a knockout in the most latest or recent. Before that, a rear naked choke against Patrick Martin, and then a decision over Mark Courier. And then before that, a KO loss to Tim Johnson. So that is where Darion Abbey's last 4 fights sit. Now looking at Donte Johnson, 5-fight win streak. He last fought on 7/27/2025, which was, by the time he fights on Contender Series, he's fighting before he hits 1 month. Very active here from him. Now taking a look at his last 4 fights, he has a KO win over James Ford, a KO over Ryan Parker, a KO over Jordan Sousa, and then a KO over Deontre Butts. Man, that's a bad name. Anyway, as I mentioned before, all first-round KOs on the side of Donte Johnson. And guys, the one thing that I wanted to call out here too, if you look at who they fought, I think Donte Johnson clearly has a weaker strength of schedule. Simply being that, the only fighter that he fought that has, 14 plus fights is Jordan Sousa, who was 3-11. So that begs the question of how good is that guy, or lack thereof. So just keep that in mind. And then if you look at the side of Abbey, he has a win over a guy who's 17-10. So that tells you that, that guy clearly has 27 fight experience. And then you've got a guy who's got, 13 fights, but he at least has a positive record. And then, he did lose to a guy who had 23 fights as well. Or that would be 25 fights. My apologies. He had, Tim Johnson had 25 professional fights by the time he fought him. And so he has been in there with guys who have a lot more experience than I think what Johnson has gone up against. Jumping into the intangibles and X Factor. So for both gentlemen, neither one is a home fighter. Obviously, tons of pressure. This is the Contender Series, as we know. It's the pressure cooker. And then red flags, like I said before, Darion Abbey, 3 of his 4 professional losses are by KO. So going up against a guy in Donte Johnson who seems to have, dynamite in his hands would make you think, this is probably a bad matchup, given that his only way to lose, at least historically, is by getting knocked out. The variable that I would put here for Darion Abbey, though, he's going to have a 6-inch height advantage, assuming that 6'6" is accurate. And I say it assuming it's accurate because if you guys don't know, there are a lot of fighters in the UFC and MMA world in general where sometimes their listed height is actually, it's not accurate, right? Like we've seen this with Israel Adesanya. Like people think that Israel Adesanya is 6'4", but then you see him kind of stand next to a guy that's actually 6'4", and he looks like he might be 6'2.5", 6'3". So just calling that out, we don't know for sure, but we will see the night of how dramatic that difference is, and we can decide then. Now, Donte Johnson, the only thing that I said is a red flag is just he's only had 3 professional heavyweight fights, but was still successful in each of those bouts, winning by round 1 KO. So that leads me to my pick, guys. I'm going Donte Johnson. I just think that the fact that, although he's going to be smaller, it's clear that, he's going to have that youth advantage, but he's also going to have probably the speed, the lighter man skill, the power on the feet. I just think he's a slicker boxer. He's probably likely to land that kill shot that puts Donte Abbey or Darion Abbey away. And I believe that that's going to happen. I have a 3 out of 5 confidence. Jumping into the next fight on the card, we've got Cristian Pérez versus Manoel Sousa. Pérez, 26 years old, 5'9", no reach, but 155 pounds because this is a lightweight bout. 13-1 record, 0-0 in the 0-0 in the UFC. Then Manoel Sousa, 28 years old, 5'9", 68.9-inch reach. 68.9-inch reach. Come on. Like, what point? What? Just fucking give him a 69-inch reach. My God. 12-1 record for Manoel Sousa. Looking at the styles for this fight. So, Cristian Pérez is 46% of his wins by KO, 31% of his wins by submission. So he's got a well-balanced game here. A weakness that I call out off the bat for Cristian Pérez, he hasn't fought in over a year. So, there could be, some questions there, right? Now, I'm not making the same mistake I made last week, guys. And you're going to understand what I mean by that as we get further into this video. Manoel Sousa's 57% of wins by KO, 25% of his wins by submission, never has been finished as a professional. Weaknesses for him, he was taken down and controlled in his only pro loss from what I saw in Bellator, I think it was. He got taken down and just, obviously his opponent was able to win on the scorecards there. Jumping into our momentum check for these gentlemen. Cristian Pérez has a 5-fight win streak. He last fought MMA. So if you guys remember what I said in the last slide here, Pérez hasn't fought in over a year, but his last MMA fight was almost 2 years ago. So that is a big call out that I want to make because when you look at his last 4 fights, he did fight last year in 2024, but that was a karate combat, a karate specific fight. And then his last MMA bout prior to that, as I mentioned, in Combats Global, which is where Jimenez from last week actually fought as well. And that fight happened, like I said, on 12/2/2023. So pretty long MMA layoff for Cristian Pérez. Now, Manoel Sousa, 1-fight win streak. He last fought on March 28, 2025. He got a unanimous decision win over Lucas Barros. Before that, a loss to Archie Colgan. And then a win over Tim Wild and a win over Paulo Lilia, I believe that says. Now, because I didn't go through Pérez, let's just take a look at his. So he lost to John Marquez in a karate bout. But before that, he had a win over Sebastian, I don't know how to say his last name, and Bruno Canetti, and then a win over Gilbert Ordonez. Intangibles and X factors here, guys. So neither one of these guys is going to be the home fighter. There's tons of pressure, of course. Some red flags that I've called out on Cristian Pérez. He hasn't had an MMA fight in 2 years, which I already mentioned. But then also another variable that I'm going to call out. He trains at the UFC-PI in Mexico City. He's also trained with Charles Oliveira, Du Bronx himself. And those are some big feathers in the cap of Cristian Pérez. I think it's going to pay dividends in his performance. On the other side, Manoel Sousa. Guys, this man is the only person to knock out Mauricio Hufi. He got a KO win over Mauricio Hufi in 2019. So a lot of people are probably writing the check off that, right? And guys, what I meant by not making the same mistake as last week is I'm going Cristian Pérez, because if you guys followed last week's video, I ultimately chose Tommy Quosi versus Ramiro Jimenez. And the reason I did so was because of the fact that Jimenez hadn't fought in 18 months, right? He was out for a very long time, but I didn't have that little nugget of knowledge that I learned while watching the live event, that he's been training at the UFCPI, getting a lot of rounds in with really good fighters, getting good training. And what do you think I did, guys? I like to learn from my losses. Losses aren't L's if you learn from it, right? So what did I do? I did some research. I checked out Cristian Pérez on Instagram, and my boy is at the UFCPI like I thought he might be. When I saw that he lives in Mexico City, I'm like, yeah, this dude's definitely hitting that PI up. And he was, in fact, in several photos showing off that he was in camp or in, different training sessions at the UFCPI in Mexico City. So that is a huge plus in my opinion, because he's probably getting really good looks with other fighters, but then also getting like one-on-one training with the different pupils that might be there visiting. And so that's a huge plus. And then also when you mix in the fact that Pérez has some rounds in training with Do Bronx, I saw a picture of them. It wasn't like a picture I would take with Do Bronx where I'm like, just a fan. Like they had their rash guards on. They were clearly in Diego Lima's gym that I remember seeing many times on different videos and whatnot. And so that tells you he was in there getting some rounds in and some training in. Overall, guys, I'm not making the same mistake as last time. And who knows, maybe I end up paying the price. But I think Pérez can get this one done, guys, especially with the looks he's had in training. He could likely get a sub or even bring this to a decision. KO is still there too, but I think if Pérez, being more of a submission artist, is likely to bring this to the ground and look for something in terms of a submission. 3 out of 5 confidence, so you guys do what you want with that. The next fight on the card, we've got Alik Lorenz versus Abdul-Rakhman Yakhyaev. I think that's how you say his last name. Alik, 28 years old, 6'3", 77-inch reach, 205 pounds, 6-1 record, 0-0 in the UFC. Yakhyaev is 24 years old, 6'2". His reach is not applicable because it's not on Tapology. 205 pounds, 6-0 as a pro. Jumping into the styles makes fights for this one. Alik Lorenz, 83% of his wins by KO, 100% finish rate overall. He has 1 sub on his record. The rest are KOs. I really like the way Alik Lorenz mixes in the body shots, guys. Not something you see a lot at these heavier weight classes, but he is crispy at how he switches up those combos. Like a couple of his finishes, he's going to the top and then he's throwing the body shots, getting the double body hook in there. And I really like to see that, especially in these heavier weight classes, because it's not a very commonly used tool by a lot of light heavyweights, unfortunately. Now, weaknesses that I have for Lorenz is that his only pro loss was by KO, and he was actually KO'd by Darion Abbey, who's also fighting on this card, fun fact. Now, Yakhyaev, on the other hand, is 50% of his wins by submission, 33% of his wins by KO. Some weaknesses I would call it for Yakhyaev is he's undefeated, but all of his opponents have only had a max of 7 fights or less, okay? So that is a little bit worrisome for me because it begs the question of how solid were those opponents and also how much experience did they bring to the table where they could test him early in his career. And that is where I would question, what he was able to gain or learn from those opponents because they were very inexperienced themselves. Now, taking a look at the momentum check, Lorenz 5-fight win streak. He last fought on November 8th, 2024. Taking a look at his last 4 fights, he has a win over Ryan Parker, a win over Thomas Powell, a win over Ben Parrish, and a win over Kyler Fairchild. Don't know really any of those guys. You can see that their records are kind of a mixed bag, but most of them are either an even record or just barely positive. But you have a guy that's 6-4, so 10 fights, a guy that's 5-5, 10 fights, a guy that's 6-6, 12 fights. So he's definitely been in there with guys who have a bit more fights on their record. Whereas on the side of Yakhyaev, he's got a 6-fight win streak. He last fought on 9/26/24. And while he's undefeated, like I said, guys, he's got a win over a 4-1 opponent, a win over a 5-2 opponent, a win over a 7-0 opponent, and then a win over an 0-1 opponent. So like I said in my last slide, the only opponent on here, there's 2 that have 7 total fights overall, and no one past 7 fights. So that just begs the question, like I said, of how many looks is he getting in those fights from these guys where they can test him and bring that, savvy experience to the table. Now, intangibles and X factors, really nothing to call out about these guys, but I will say for Yakhyaev, because he last fought in September of 2024, it's almost been a year since he's fought. So that is definitely a long time off. But overall, guys, I think the reason I have to go this way, and I am going Yakhyaev, the reason I'm going Yakhyaev is because Yakhyaev, from what I've seen in his clips, he does mix in some of that like Eastern European wrestling, if you will. It's kind of like a Russian style. He is from Turkey, I believe. But I think that Yakhyaev will mix in that grappling. And unfortunately, I haven't seen too much from Lorenz in his ability to stop those takedowns and things of that nature. And so I am kind of leaning more Yakhyaev here, but I will be rooting for Lorenz to get the win. Got to root for the American, guys. I think a decision, 3 out of 5 confidence. Jumping into the co-main event of this evening, we've got Damon Wilson versus Márcio Barbosa. Now, Damon Wilson, 32 years old, 5'9", not applicable reach, 145 pounds, 9-2 record. Barbosa, on the other hand, 27 years old, 5'7", 145 pounds, 16-2 record. Styles for this fight, Damon Wilson is dude, this guy is a dog, man. Like, he is going out there, he's switching stances, he's walking opponents down and beating the shit out of them. That is Damon Wilson's style. 67% of his wins by KO, 33% of his wins by decision, 0 wins by submission. Some weaknesses for Wilson that I would call out is, he's lost by KO. Stop. God fucking damn it. He's lost by KO and sub. So, obviously, that can happen to any person that's fighting, of course. But the reason I call that out is he's kind of going up against a guy who might be able to mix both of those items in there. And then also, another thing to call is 32 at featherweight. It's not necessarily, too old at featherweight just yet, but it begs the question of how long, can he stay active here? And in a competitive fight, what does that look like for him, being that he's going to be a bit older than some of the other competition. But looking at Márcio Barbosa, 81% of his wins by KO, 13% of his wins by submission. So he's got 13 wins by KO and 2 wins by sub. Weaknesses for Barbosa, 100% of his losses by KO. Now, he has only lost, I believe, twice in his career, so not a lot, but when he's lost, it's by KO. Momentum check for these guys. So Damon Wilson, 3-fight win streak. He last fought March 14, 2025. He's got a win over Camargo, who's 6-4, a win over Ryan Lilly, 12-10, and then a win over Brandon Carrillo, 3-2. Before that, a loss to John De Jesus, who was 15-11. So Wilson's definitely been in there with guys who are a bit seasoned and have some experience. On the side of Barbosa, 3-fight win streak. He last fought on November 22nd, 2024. He has a win over Felipe Oliveira, who was 10-3, a win over Gian Sarturi, 8-2, and then a win over Wellington Prado, 13-2. Before that, a loss to Gabriel Santos, who was 8-0. And I believe Gabriel Santos is in the UFC at this point, if I'm not mistaken. Intangibles and X factors. Neither of these guys are the home fighter. Tons of pressure, as always. Damon Wilson has done well in Cage Warriors, guys, which I actually rate highly because I feel like Cage Warriors has been it's been like a melting pot, boiling pot, whatever you want to call it, of really good prospects coming from, the European circuit. Like, you have Paddy Pimblett, I think, came from Cage Warriors. You've got Ian Gary coming from Cage Warriors, Loner Kavanaugh coming from Cage Warriors. A lot of really solid European MMA guys coming from that promotion. So I do rate that pretty highly. On the side of Barbosa, nothing really to call out here. Variables I call out for him, though. Very solid left hook, guys. Like, his left hook is like some Alex Pereira type shit. Like, he hits guys with it and they just fall limp. They get hurt or dropped. I really like to see that he also brings out a very high guard. He's got that technical high guard boxing stance where it's not like your typical, I feel like we see a lot of Brazilian fighters actually have their hands more low and still have that power and speed, but like don't have that technical boxing stance. Whereas Barbosa seems to kind of always have it glued here, looking for shots, also staying defensively sound throughout the fight. He also has that real KO power. And guys, just seeing their styles, I am leaning Barbosa in this fight because I feel like although Damon Wilson's a very dynamic, he's tricky striking, he's got a lot of switching of the stances. He throws a lot of knees up the middle to the body, but then also some flying knees. Very, very good at that, especially when he gets his opponents against the cage. He starts just mixing it up really well. The thing is, I don't see Damon Wilson having that ability to walk Barbosa into those moments because I feel like the fights I've seen where Damon Wilson's kind of able to just take control and walk his opponents down are fights where he seems to have a decent size advantage, which I don't believe he's going to have in this fight. He might be a bit taller, but Barbosa is a lean fighter. And I also think that Barbosa is tricky on the feet in the sense that he keeps this high guard, so he's going to be able to kind of weave in and out of shots, but also he's very good at finding those counter shots. And I think Damon Wilson, because of the fact that he's a more versatile striker, his hands are a lot lower, right? He's not doing the, I don't know what to do with my hands. They're dropping down. And to me, that is going to be the key to success for Barbosa, is staying with that high guard, looking for those counter shots and landing at will. I could see him actually just getting a KO over Wilson in this case. I think that he has very technical striking. And one other thing I would call out for Barbosa, he is a master at cutting off the cage. In the highlights I've seen, he is very good at using footwork to cut the cage off from his opponent, which I think Wilson does very well in his own right. But this fight is really going to be a battle of who can cut the cage off and kind of be like the marauder in there to, ultimately get the win. And I feel like Barbosa is just going to have those tools and probably that durability as well. But I'm going to say this, guys. If Wilson is a big underdog, I don't know if he is or not. Maybe if you're feeling opposite of how I'm feeling, I think that Wilson's still very talented and I really like his game. So it could go the complete opposite way that I'm thinking. So if you're feeling like, doing a little sprinkle like our boy Yanni Bet says, then you go right ahead and do that. It could go either way. All right, guys, and on to the last fight of the card. We've got Trent Miller versus Ryan Gandra, not sure how you say that. Trent Miller is 29 years old, 5'11", 71-inch reach, 185 pounds because this is a middleweight bout. 8-2 record. Trent Miller fighting out of Extreme Couture, coming in on short notice actually because the other opponent for Gandra pulled out. Not too much of a short notice, but it's not like Sousa or Yakhyaev short notice. But on the opposite side, Gandra is 30 years old, 6'1", no reach online from what I saw, 185 pounds, 7-1 as a pro. Jumping into the styles for this fight, Trent Miller has 75% of his wins by KO. He's also never been KO'd in his professional career. Weaknesses for him is that 100% of his losses come by way of submission. And that is something to be a little bit concerned about when we're looking at Gandra, because Gandra not only has 43% of his wins by KO, but 28% of his wins by sub. So 2 of his 7 professional wins came by way of submission, which begs the question of, can Trent Miller stop those submissions should Gandra have that as part of his game and brings it out? Weaknesses for Gandra, though, is 100% of his pro losses. It's only 1 by KO. And just on that note with the KO aspect, Trent Miller he's built kind of like a brick shithouse, so he could have that one hit acquita that maybe catches Gandra and puts him out cold. Trent Miller is coming off of a 2-fight win streak. He last fought on May 22nd, 2025. He got a win over an opponent who was 7-9, and then a win over an opponent before that who was 5-1. Before that, a loss to an opponent who was 21-10-1, so 30-plus professional fights. And before that, a win over Marcus Nash, which was a knockout. Marcus Nash was 1-0 in that fight. I actually watched that fight, and it was a really cool knockout. But I will say, Trent Miller seemed to struggle a little bit with the taller, lankier opponent, but he was able to land that overhand right or straight right that just put him out cold. So really good win for him there. On the side of Gandra, 6-fight win streak, last fought 11-22-24. I think that he might have fought on the same card as Barbosa, who we just looked at previously. And taking a look at his last 4 fights, he had a right hook knockout over a 4-0 opponent. Before that, a 13-4 opponent where he also got a KO. Before that, a 4-3 opponent. And before that, another 4-3 opponent. Intangibles and X factors. So for once, guys, we have a home fighter here because, as I mentioned, Trent Miller fights and trains out of Extreme Couture, which is in Las Vegas. And he will be the home fighter on this evening. Tons of pressure for him, especially being that it's not only Contender Series, but he's also fighting in his own hometown. Red flags for me on the side of Trent Miller. His only losses are by sub, and I feel like he's going up against a guy who has that in his bag to potentially get a submission. The other variable that I've already said a couple times here, guys, Trent Miller trains at Extreme Couture, so keep that in mind. It's going to help him probably. He's got a lot of good looks with a lot of good opponents. Finally, the one thing I would call out about Trent Miller, he's very short reach for middleweight, okay? 71 inches is less than 6 feet tall. It's a 5'11", so he is 5'11", and his reach is 5'11". That's actually pretty average for a human being. Like most humans have a reach equal to, or sometimes less, sometimes more of what their height is, right? But when you consider the fact that it's 71-inch reach in a middleweight division where, you've got guys like, Israel Adesanya, who has 80-inch reach. And now that's not the standard, but I would say your average reach in the middleweight division, don't quote me on this because I didn't actually look into it, but I would argue the average reach of like middleweights, especially in the top 15, is probably like 73 inches or more, I would think. Just given that the average height is usually probably just above 6 foot or maybe 6 foot even. So just keep that in mind. I did call that out because I would worry about that in a matchup like this. Now, I am going Gandra, guys, because I feel like Gandra, he just seems to have the better wins overall when you look at his record in terms of where he's been able to beat a guy who was 13-4 and not only beat him but get a KO. The way that Gandra fights is very, very violent, and he is just cracking, looking for shots. Now, I will say, in the fight that I just mentioned when we were talking about Trent Miller's right hand KO that he got over that guy that was 6'4" happened by way of Trent Miller looking like he was hurt, kind of on the feet, backing up to the cage, and he just planted and threw a right hand and knocked the guy out. So, Gandra's style is very marauder-like. He's going to walk forward, he's going to sling shots and look to just really catch the chin of Trent Miller. So Trent Miller still has that KO power, though, where it could be an equalizer here. Ultimately, though, I'm going Gandra just because I think Gandra having a couple wins by submission on his record, too, has me thinking that Gandra will be able to mix in those submission attacks if he needs them. And I think that is what made me lean towards him. But like I said, guys, if you're feeling opposite or you're feeling risky, you could look into the Miller bet because I think that Miller, like I said, has that one-hitter quitter. If he's able to stay safe and or even, fake being hurt or something like that, he could lull Gandra in, who's going to come in like a marauder and just, time that shot perfectly to get the win. We shall see what happens. But I'm thinking Gandra gets this done by KO, 3 out of 5 confidence. And there you have it, guys. That is my picks and predictions for Dana White's Contender Series Season 9, Week 3. Make sure you give this video a like if you enjoyed. And please subscribe to Fight Feed if you haven't already so you can stay on top of all the new MMA content that I'll be posting. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.